Hello and welcome. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this year's Raif Badawi Award. My name is Constantin Schreiber. I'm a journalist working for German channel ARD, and it's my pleasure to host today's event, an event that's very different from the ones we had in the years before, of course, because of the Corona situation. And first of all, I'd like to say that we host the ceremony in English, but there is also an Arabic translation available to those of you who like to prefer to listen to it in Arabic. So you just have to choose from the languages in this video Arabic, and then there is a live translation for you available. With the award, we want to honor the work of Raif Badawi, the famous Saudi journalist, writer, who is still imprisoned under brutal conditions in his home country. And through the award, we want to keep the memory of his case alive, hoping that one day he will be freed and will be able to return to his family, which is currently in Canada. And it's my big pleasure that Ensaf Haidar, Raif Badawi's wife, who lives in Canada, in Quebec, is with us today. And she will deliver the opening speech of today's ceremony. Ensaf.
Hi, Constantin.
What news do you have of Raif Badawi? Is there any information that you can give us on his condition at the moment?
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome from Frankfurt. Today, Raif Badawi has been sitting in a Saudi prison for 3,041 days. Ladies and gentlemen, 3,041 days, that means more than 8 years. And he is not doing well and still faces the life-threatening punishment of 1,000 whiplashes. He has to endure this horrific situation just because he stood up for every human being's right to freedom on his blog. By doing that, he exercised one of the noblest human rights, the right to freedom of expression. A totalitarian regime like Saudi Arabia that wants to retain its absolute power by all means necessary does not accept any open expression of critique. And I am looking forward to hearing from Agnes Calamar, who investigated the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi 2 years ago for the UN and proved that the Saudi regime will not stop at its own borders to suppress and kill critical voices. In spite of the difficult times we are living in at the moment, I'm very glad to be able to present the Raif Badawi Award today, together with the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation. On the initiative of Raif's wife, Ensaf Haidar, who I hereby warmly welcome, we bestow this prize upon courageous journalists who, through their work, make a significant contribution to the promotion of freedom of expression and freedom to publish. Today, we are lauding Abdul Rahman al-Zwib, who continues to write columns and draw attention to injustices in Yemen, a country that, with the leading participation of Saudi Arabia, has been at war for the past 6 years. And I say very clear that this situation is with the use of German weapons. Abdul Rahman al-Zwib is a role model for all of us who as civil society need to stand up for free speech and strongly protest against its oppression wherever it may occur. Our thoughts are with Raif Badawi And we call on the global community to stand up for his freedom. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this opening speech, Alexander Skiepes, the Managing Director of the German Publishers and Booksellers Association, who stepped in as I was speaking to Ensaf Haidar in Canada, as I'm not sure if the connection works to Ensaf. I'd just like to check if I can talk to her now. I can see her, I can see her image. I'm not quite sure if she can hear me now. Yeah. So again, I'd like to, hello. I'd like to ask her if she has any information about Raif Badawi, the conditions he is kept under in Saudi Arabia in prison, and what his condition is like.
طبعا أنا أتواصل مع رائف أو رائف يتواصل معي في الأسبوع مرة أو مرتين على حسب يعني على حسب الوضع في وبس بالنسبة لأخبار القضية ما عندي أي جديد، ولكن في الفترة الأخيرة مر رايف بصعوبات كثير في السجن، والآن الحمد لله الوضع شبه مستقر.
What is the importance to you of the Raif Badawi Award?
أكيد هذا الموضوع كثير يسعدني إنه كل سنة تقوم فعالية منذ 5 سنوات تذكير برائف وجائزة باسم رائف. أكيد هذا الموضوع كثير يسعدنا ويعطينا كمان الأمل ويحسسنا على إنه العالم لا زالوا مستمرين في الدعوة بإطلاق سراح رائف.
Do you still have hope that he will be free one day? Because at the moment it doesn't look like there is much movement in his case.
أكيد أنا دائما يعني الشيء الوحيد اللي أنا أملكه هو إني أكون إيجابية وأكون عندي أمل، وأكيد ما راح أفقد الأمل ولا في أي لحظة.
Ensaf Haidar, many thanks for this update on Raif's case and on your opening remarks. We will come back to you later during the discussion that we will hold in the course of the ceremony. But at this point, I think it's also important to show you the person who has been awarded this year's Raif Badawi Award for his outstanding commitment to report on the conditions, on the political situation in his home country, Yemen. Abdul Rahman Azabi, as we have heard earlier, he lives in a country that is war-torn, the poorest country of all Arabic nations. The situation there is very dire due to the war that's been going on for years now, and he continues to report on the social, the political situation there, makes comments and remarks on the different fractions that are not working for the good of the country, and this makes him a very honorable person to be awarded the Raif Badawi Award this year, and we have a short video for you to get to know this person better.
عبد الرحمن علي الزبيب، الجمهورية اليمنية صنعاء، من مواليد 1981. التحقت مبكرا بالعمل الحقوقي والإنساني منذ عام 2000. تاريخ التحاقي بكلية الشريعة والقانون جامعة صنعاء. التحقت مباشرة منذ سنوات الأولى الجامعية باتحاد طلاب اليمن، وكنت ناشطا في هذا الاتحاد الذي كان يدافع عن حقوق الإنسان وحقوق الطالب اليمني وحرياته، وشاركت في كثير من الأنشطة والفعاليات ذات الصلة. عقب حصولي على درجة الليسانس في عام 2004 التحقت مباشرة بمؤسسة محاماة مرموقة كانت تتخصص في الجانب الإعلامي والصحافي والدفاع عن الصحفيين والإعلاميين والمدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان. استلمت أكثر من عدة ملفات، من ضمنها ملف الأستاذ عبد الكريم الخيواني وغيرها من الملفات، ودافعنا عنهم أمام النيابات والمحاكم. أحببت هذه الفئة وهذه الشريعة الهامة التي تضحي بنفسها من أجل حماية حقوق الآخرين وحريتهم. عقب انتهاء السنة في العمل بالمحاماة التحقت بالنيابة العامة الادعاء العام، وكانت فرصة للدفاع عن حقوق الإنسان من منبر رسمي متخصص في الدفاع عن حقوق الإنسان وحرياته. في عام 2013 تم انتدابي في رئاسة الجمهورية للانضمام إلى لجنة قضائية رئاسية ضمن العدالة الانتقالية لمعالجة ونظر قضايا الموظفين المبعدين والأراضي المنهوبة في الجنوب. واستمريت في العمل من 2013 إلى 2016 في هذه اللجنة الهامة. بعد اندلاع الحرب في 2015 رجعت إلى صنعاء واستمريت في العمل في الجانب الحقوقي، وانضممت إلى عدد من المنظمات المجتمع المدني، وقمت بتأسيس اتحادات ونقابات مهنية وعمالية وغيرها للدفاع عن حقوق الإنسان والشريعة الهامة. وانضممت إلى منظمة مجتمع مدني متخصصة في السجون والدفاع عن السجناء. ابنتي ريحانة.
حقوق الإنسان، الحرية.
أشارك أيضا في برامج حقوقية في برنامج قناة الهوية نافذة العدالة وغيرها من البرامج التي تدافع عن حقوق الإنسان وتعمل مساءلة مجتمعية لسلطات الدولة العامة.
Rahman Azabi, the winner of this year's Raif Badawi Award, who has sent us this video earlier when he got to know that he won the award. As we've already heard from Mr. Skipis in particular, that the situation in Yemen is a very difficult one, especially for journalists who would like to report on the political situation in the country. We are very pleased to hear from a very honorable high-ranking official from the United Nations who is very familiar with the situation on the Arabian Peninsula, more about the importance of the work of journalists and of human rights activists in this area, particularly with regards to the role of Saudi Arabia, which has become very clear, particularly during the case of Jamal Khashoggi, when he was killed inside the embassy of Saudi Arabia in Istanbul. But this is only one of the most visible cases to shed light on the very horrible human rights record situation in Saudi Arabia, which plays a very important role when it comes to the conflicts in the area. I'd like to welcome Agnes Calamar, the Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial summary or arbitrary executions to the United Nations, who will give the laudatio to this year's winner of Raif Badawi Award.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you, dear friends who are present online and those who couldn't make it because of repression or arbitrary and cruel imprisonment. Dear Ensaf, dear Raif Badawi, who could not be with us, dear jury members, and dear Abdul, fantastic winner. It is my great honor to join these many voices marking the occasion of the Raif Badawi Award for 2020 in celebration of its incredible, inspiring honoree and in affirmation of all that for which Rafi stands. Friends, around the world, the indicators are, particularly those related to freedom of expression, warns us that human rights are on the decline. The birth of a new global governance system is proving to be painful and bloody, characterized by a multiplicity of conflict, toxic proxy wars that are leaving millions exposed to violence, abandoned to poverty, locked in exclusion, and under the heavy heel of oppression. Around the world, populist leaders have gained power. They embrace nativist nationalism and xenophobia. They reject globalization and deny their obligation to universal human rights. They instrumentalize our fears for their political gain, even in the face of an unprecedented pandemic. There is unfolding, potentially if not already, a global shifting of tectonic plates, the result of the combined pressure of a misunderstood and little controlled technological revolution, a better understood but gravely mishandled climate crisis, and unaddressed deepening inequalities. These are not abstract phenomena. The war in Yemen testified to that. It has produced the largest of this world humanitarian crisis, with 80% of the population of Yemen thrown into dependence on humanitarian assistance. The country, in the midst of the Arab Spring, had worked to free itself from the shackles of oppressive regime. But for those dreams of freedom, the life of millions has been made a living hell. Years after years, a UN panel of experts have denounced egregious violations committed by both sides of the conflict, including the indiscriminate shelling of civilian infrastructure. Meanwhile, Britain, Canada, France, Iran, the United States, and I've just heard Germany, have continued their support to the warring side, including through large arms export. The UN Security Council has called for a ceasefire while simultaneously providing arms to enable the fighting in Yemen to continue. Years after years, the world has watched. The great powers have profited. Yemen's neighbors have assaulted, and the internal factions have fractured and corrupted. And the people of Yemen is dying. Through shelling, through deliberate killings, they die of starvation, of easily treatable diseases, and they die of COVID-19. And they die in prison. Against its many casualties, this cruel and unrelenting war against the freedoms of the Yemeni people has seen a brutal targeting of the freedom of the press, of freedom of speech, of freedom of belief, of freedom of assembly. Journalists have been rounded up to be detained without due process in a network of hidden prison. Lawyers and activists have disappeared, tortured, assassinated. And yet, what is astounding, and as this powerful symbolic award affirms, is how astonishingly vital remains the civil society of Yemen. More repression has been met bravely with even more expression. More violence has not rendered the people silent. Thanks to the brave deviance of journalists and writers, of human rights activists and lawyers, the demands that human rights be respected, protected, and upheld have not been gagged, but they are being amplified. And few exemplify that evolution, that development, and that courage more than does the winner of this year's award, Abdul Rahman. Abdul Rahman has chosen to stand out when the crush of the authorities' war and the cruel cost of conflict would rather have him cower. Never underestimate in dark time the power and purpose of shining light, of illuminating suffering and demanding its relief, of exposing violations and demanding that they be addressed, like Abdul Rahman does through his radio program, of revealing the silenced and the silences, and insisting that in their place there be voices, demands, and participation for justice. Abdul Rahman is responding to the attacks by demanding more and better for the people of Yemen. His message is that even in context of extraordinary suffering and duress, it remains possible to launch offensive for human rights, for journalism, and against corruption. Could there be a more appropriate lesson for us all? I have little doubt that this too would be what Raif would have us do. It is what Jamal Khashoggi would want us to do. It is what Loujain El Halfoul, Samar Badawi, Nassima El Sada, Nouf Abdulaziz, and Maya Al Zarani ask us to do. No country should be able to buy their way out of accountability, no matter their influence, strategic relevance, no matter the nature of their friendship. Whether this country is called Saudi Arabia or Iran, Russia, China, or the United States. The state execution of Mr. Khashoggi by Saudi Arabia has revealed many accountability deficits and gaps within the international system. It has shown that we are poorly prepared to respond to targeted killings, specifically of those who dare to dream and those who dare to dissent. The continuing imprisonment of Raif Badawi and of the women human rights defenders I have mentioned, of journalists in Saudi Arabia, but the world over, the continuing threats against freedom of the press, against human rights defenders, against truth, against the work of reporting and unveiling in Saudi Arabia, in Yemen, in Iran, in China. These highlight too how much more we need to defend and protect those very courageous people who stand up and speak up. The fact that we have so little tools is deeply troubling, not the least because of the increasingly violent intolerance that we witness the world over for the independence of mind, for critical thinking, for independent reporting. This is why I have asked and recommended that the international community must equip itself urgently with more effective tools to respond to this deficit. I have called on all to advocate for a UN standing international investigation instrument to independently investigate targeted killings, but also other acts of violence against journalists and human rights defenders. I am also demanding that the world equips itself with what I have called the Khashoggi Sanctions, which will focus on individuals at the highest level of the state who are responsible for threatening and for arbitrarily detaining journalists and human rights defenders, free thinkers, and peaceful dissidents. I am calling them the Khashoggi Sanctions because I believe we must target the chain of command and we must go high and higher on that chain of command. In the face of the profound transformation our world is witnessing, in the face of the many threats from populists, from climate inaction, from the pandemic, in the face of the counter-revolution waged by powerful countries around the world, it may be tempting to adopt a posture of defensiveness, to say, let's protect what we have achieved, let's not demand more. But this strategy, in my view, will never be enough. We cannot respond effectively to what is happening to our world without going on the offensive. Instead, we can and must do what Abdul Rahman has shown us can and must be done. Against the powerful, the despot, the populist, and the coward who may want us to retreat, Abdul Rahman is daring us to stand up and stand out, to do more than defend and resist, but to continue to dream, to continue to build, to continue to evolve, and to continue to demand. With him, we need to stand up and speak up. With him, we must launch an offensive for the truth and for rights. Thank you very much.
Agnes Calamar, the Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial, summary, or arbitrary executions to the United Nations. Many thanks for this very critical speech analysis of the role of many countries, particularly when it comes to the conflicts in the Middle East and on the Arabian Peninsula with regards to Yemen in particular, and also a strong call to the international organizations and to many governments to do more to solve the crisis in Yemen. We have already seen Rahman Azabi in the video he has sent us previous or earlier to the awards ceremony, and I'm very honored that he is with us today during this awards ceremony right now, live from Yemen. I think the internet connection is working, so I welcome Rahman Azabi, and I'd like to hear from him what the award means to him and for his work.
السلام عليكم سيداتي سادتي. جوتن آبند. أشكر مؤسسة فريدريش لتكريمي لهذه الجائزة، الذي أعتبر هذا التكريم ليس تكريما خاصا بي، وإنما تكريم لجميع الصحفيين والمدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان في اليمن وفي جميع أنحاء العالم. هذا التكريم هو التزام وتعهد ومسؤولية تقع على عاتقي، وأنا أتعهد أمامكم وأمام جميع شعوب العالم وأمام الشعب اليمني بأني سأستمر في الدفاع عن حقوق الإنسان ورفع أصواتنا بالحرية وإيقاف انتهاكات حقوق الإنسان في كل مكان وفي كل زمان بلا تمييز ولا استثناء، ما دام قلبي الضعيف ينبض بالحياة. حتى بعد أن يتوقف قلبي عن النبض في الحياة ويرتقي روحي إلى السماء، ستظل روحي تلاحق أولئك المنتهكين لحقوق الإنسان وحرياته. لن نتوقف عند أي مصاعب أو مشاكل أو انتهاكات لحقوق الإنسان. سنواجه الصعوبات والمشاكل بالتحدي، التحدي سنواجهه بالتحدي، الألم سنواجهه بالأمل. هذا ما وندعو جميع الأحرار في العالم، في ألمانيا، في بريطانيا، في أمريكا، في جميع دول العالم. يجب أن نتكاتف جميعا لإيقاف انتهاكات حقوق الإنسان بشكل عام. أتكلم أنا من اليمن الذي تعاني من حرب منفلتة طاحنة، منفلتة عن القواعد والقوانين الإنسانية التي كان بالإمكان للمجتمع الدولي الضغط للحد من هذه الانتهاكات، لكن للأسف الشديد ما زالت الحرب تطحننا. ورغم ذلك استمرارية الحرب لا تبرر التغاضي أو التعامي عن انتهاكات حقوق الإنسان في اليمن وحرياته. نحن ما زلنا نتكلم وسنتكلم ونرفع أصواتنا ضد منتهكي حقوق الإنسان في أي مكان وفي أي زمان دون تمييز ولا استثناء حتى يتوقف هذا الانتهاك. نحن كمدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان وصحفيين شجعان نحن نقوم بعمل نبيل، نقوم بعمل الأنبياء. رسالة الأنبياء: محمد رسول الإسلام جاء ليحرر الإنسان من البشر من العبودية ومن الانتهاك. المسيح عيسى جاء ليحرر العالم من الحقد والبغضاء والحسد وانتهاكات حقوق الإنسان وليحرره. موسى عليه السلام جاء ليحرر الإنسان من الظلم والاضطهاد ووقف سدا منيعا أمام الظالمين. نحن كصحفيين شجعان وكمدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان نسير في هذا المسار، نسير في مسار أعز وأغلى وأنبل رسالة الأنبياء، رسالة الحرية. يجب أن نتكاتف، يجب أن نكون جميعا صفا واحدا لإيقاف أي انتهاك. أنا هنا أتكلم أناشد وأطالب الملك سلمان بن عبد العزيز ملك المملكة العربية السعودية وولي عهده محمد بن سلمان بأن يتم الإفراج الفوري عن رائف بدوي. أتمنى أن يتم إيقاف الاحتجاز القسري له وأن يتم لم شمله خلال شهر أكتوبر. أتمنى أن تكون الليلة يكون رائف بدوي مع عائلته آمنا مستقرا. ما ذنبه؟ ذنبه أنه دافع عن حقوق الإنسان. أجمل وأفضل رسالة وعمل هي الدفاع عن حقوق إنسان أيا كان بلا تمييز ولا استثناء، رغم المشاكل، رغم الضغوطات، رغم المعيقات. لكنني ألتزم أمامكم بأني سأواصل في رفع صوتي والمطالبة باحترام حقوق الإنسان أكان في اليمن أو خارج اليمن. فأنا هنا أشيد بدور الأمم المتحدة ومنظماتها الإنسانية في عملها، لكن ما زالت آمالنا كبيرة جدا، وما زال عمل الأمم المتحدة دون هذا الأمل المرجو. نحن نستعد ومستعدين للعمل ضمن لجان، ضمن فرق، ضمن ما يروه داخل اليمن وخارج اليمن لإيقاف الانتهاكات عن حقوق الإنسان وحرياته، وإبراز حرية المدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان وإيقاف أي انتهاكات. أنا أطالب بإيقاف الحرب في اليمن، وأيضا أطالب بالإفراج عن رائف بدوي من السجن في السعودية، وأطالب كذلك بالإفراج عن جميع المدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان والصحفيين في جميع أنحاء العالم. يجب أن يحترموا، يجب أن يقدروا هؤلاء الناس الذين يدافعون عن حقوق الإنسان. أنا أؤكد لكم أنه رغم المشاكل والمضايقات والظروف المادية وغيرها التي نتعرض لها باستمرار، لكن كلها تزول عندما نشاهد ابتسامة رجل أو امرأة أو طفل، ابتسامة شاحبة لشخص أنصفناه، أعدنا له حقه، أنصفناه ممن ظلمناه، ممن ظلمه الآخرين. نحن ظلمناه بسكوتنا ولن يستمر الظلم. سنستمر في رفع أصواتنا للمطالبة بإيقاف انتهاكات حقوق الإنسان، وأعتبر هذه الجائزة وهذا التكريم تكريم لجميع الصحفيين في اليمن وفي العالم، ومسؤولية ألتزم بها أخلاقيا وشخصيا للجميع، لأني سأستمر في هذا المسار الذي اخترته مبكرا، وستكون هذه محطة إيجابية ودافع كبير جدا لأتكلم من بعد دولي ومن منظمة عريقة ومن مجتمع عريق ومن مجتمع دولي. ما زال هناك ضمير ينبض رغم أننا نشكو أن هناك ضعف، لكن ما زال ضمير الإنسانية في العالم ينبض، ونحن ندعو ونتمنى أن يستمر هذا الحراك القوي والحراك المجتمعي لإيقاف انتهاكات حقوق الإنسان وحرياته، ونطالب بفتح تحقيق في احتجاز رائف بدوي واحتجاز أي شخص كسرا لأنه يدافع عن حقوق الإنسان أو صحفي حر بسبب حرية الرأي والتعبير المكفولة قانونا ووفقا للقوانين الوطنية والدولية. رائف بدوي لا يقل مأساته ومعاناته عن مشكلة وعن قضية جمال خاشقجي. جمال خاشقجي معروف أنه انتهى رغم المأساة التي شعرنا بها بأن يتم إنهاء شخص حياته بهذه البشاعة، لكن من يتم إخفاءه كسرا هو أصعب، ونتمنى أن يتم التحقيق والعاجل وأن يتم الإفراج عنه بدون أي قيد أو شرط خلال أقرب وقت ممكن. ونتمنى من المنظمات الدولية والأمم المتحدة أن تستمر في عملها وأن تتفاعل مع جميع الأشخاص في جميع أنحاء العالم المحتجزين بسبب رفع أصواتهم للحرية ورفع أصواتهم لإيقاف انتهاكات حقوق الإنسان.
Thank you very much, Abdul Rahman Azabi. We will also speak and discuss some of the matters that you have mentioned later during the ceremony together with Agnes Calamar, and get a bit more into the details also when it comes to the conflict in Yemen. But just shortly before we continue with this discussion, I would like to get in Bettina Stark-Watzinger, who is a member of parliament here in Germany of the FDP, the Liberal Party, who has been a very loyal supporter for Raif's case over the years, and through the foundation, the Friedrich-Naumann-Stiftung also supports this award, and this award can be has been able to be awarded every year since 2016. So I'd like to give Bettina Stark-Watzinger now the opportunity to add some remarks from her side.
A tortured land with its people ravaged in ways that should shock the conscience of humanity. This is the final conclusion of the report of international and regional experts in their analysis of the human rights situation in Yemen from July 2019 to June 2020. Yemen, its people, its civil society, and its media have suffered 6 years of armed conflict in Yemen. We, as Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom, for which I stand here, were particularly pleased that the independent jury chose Abdul Rahman al-Zabib as this year's winner of the Raif Badawi Award. He represents the Yemeni people, civil society, and the Yemeni media. He's a lawyer and he gives a voice to the voiceless here and now. That is what our human rights work is all about, supporting civil society where others have long since turned their backs. A prize always has only a symbolic character, but the Raif Badawi Award is a symbol of all those who wanted nothing more than to express their opinions freely and now have to face oppression, persecution, and imprisonment. To write about what they observe in front of their houses, to write and to speak out loudly what they think and what our opinion is about is a universal human right. This universal human right belongs to everyone, whether he or she is a fighter of a war party, or a doctor in a hospital, a sick or wounded patient, a party member, a human rights activist, or a journalist. Human rights make no distinction between professional groupings, political convictions, religious beliefs, or the fact that we live here in peace, or Mr. Azabi and his family in Yemen. Our prize winner described human rights as a universal language. This is not only a very beautiful linguistic picture, but in fact, the most accurate description of universality of human rights. As the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom, we strive to speak this language in all our 60 project countries. One thing we must not forget when we look at Yemen or other armed conflict areas and difficult human rights situations, perpetrators and those who are accused of having committed crimes of enforced disappearance, torture, arbitrary detention, or other serious human rights violations are human beings. Not institutions, not war parties they work for, not governments, no. It is always people who commit crimes. They are people who are equipped with reason and moved by free will when committing crimes against their fellow human beings. As fellow human beings living in the same presence, we can do nothing else but to appeal and use our institutions for which we are active in, as I am being a member of the German Bundestag, in order to stand up for others. And we must support those who are courageous enough to stand up for human rights, especially freedom of expression, despite threats to their well-being, as in the case for the prize winner, Abdul Rahman al-Zabib. Abdul Rahman al-Zabib, you deserve the Raif Badawi Award from the Börsenverein des Deutschen Buchhandels and the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom. Congratulations, and I will symbolically hand over the prize, which I hope that it will soon reach you in person. Congratulations, and thank you very much for your work.
There is some applause despite the online coverage of our ceremony today. Thank you, Bettina Stark-Watzinger, Member of Parliament of the Bundestag, for your speech and for your remarks. And to wrap up today's event, I would like to continue with a short discussion on the current rights situation worldwide, and particularly in Yemen, together with Agnes Calamar and Abdurrahman Azabib, to people who could not be better equipped with the knowledge and the in-depth analysis of the human rights situation in many of the countries, and particularly, of course, in Yemen. I would like to actually start with Agnes Calamar, because you held such a strong plaidoyer for human rights, and you also accused countries, the big players like China, Russia, also the United States and the West in entirety, to play a very dire role in the many conflicts that we see worldwide. Aren't you frustrated sometimes that despite your very clear words, there seems to be happening very little on the ground?
Well, frustration, maybe, anger certainly, and determination even more. You know, the problem we're facing right now is that there are very few countries who are prepared to stand up for what is right. And Yemen is a case in point. I mean, it's extraordinary that on one hand, the Security Council called for a ceasefire and has done so repeatedly. And on the other, almost every member of the Security Council is selling weapons to parties to the conflict. You know, the hypocrisy is mind-boggling. And the Commission of Inquiry on Yemen denounced it very strongly with all the fact and the evidence in June. And again, you know, on a regular basis, they've done so. So it is frustrating. It is incredibly, you know, in the face of that, we need to remain determined, and we cannot let them write the full story. Yes, they are powerful. Yes, they have, you know, their government leaders and so on. But against such a trend, we must stand firm and we must stand courageous. There has never been a better moment where we are being tested. And, you know, if that's what it is, that's what it is. We've got to keep hammering the fact. And the fact is, we are, all of us, the people of Germany who are electing government, the people of France, the people of Saudi Arabia, they are not electing, but never mind. You know, the actions of our governments is making us complicit in the humanitarian and human rights disaster in Yemen. So we need to continue demanding accountability. There have been a number of steps taken. So, you know, it's not as if nothing is happening. In the US, the American Congress has demanded an end to the arms export to Saudi Arabia, particularly because of Yemen. The President of the United States has vetoed that Congress resolution. So here we have a direct undermining of democratic processes. But, you know, that could change on the 3rd of November, maybe. In the UK, a similar process, the court has demanded that the sale of weapons be suspended.
Madam Callamard, maybe let's continue later on those details, because after you painted a general picture from your perspective from inside the UN organization, I would like to hear from Mr. Rahman Azabi, who is inside a country that is probably watching the international community and wondering what is going on. Are they going to help us? And where do those weapons come from? I mean, how do you see how the international organizations, how the West, how your fellow Arab countries, how they work, and how do you judge them?
نعم، شكرا جزيلا. نحن في اليمن ننظر يعني نظرة إلى ميثاق الأمم المتحدة وميثاق تأسيسها، الذي نص على أن من أهم أسباب ومبررات وميثاق تأسيس الأمم المتحدة هي إيقاف الحروب في جميع دول العالم والحد من انتهاكات حقوق الإنسان في جميع دول العالم. هذا هو هدف وجوهر الأمم وميثاق تأسيس الأمم المتحدة. نحن هنا كشعب يمني نوجه إلى الأمم المتحدة سؤالا وإلى مجلس الأمن الدولي: هل اليمن جزء من هذا العالم الذي تأسست الأمم المتحدة من أجل إيقاف هذه الحروب؟ الحرب في اليمن هل هي حرب في نفس الكوكب، في كوكب الأرض، وفي نفس المكان، وفي نفس يعني المجال الذي قامت الأمم المتحدة وتأسست من أجل إيقاف الحروب؟ لماذا تستمر الحرب في اليمن رغم أن الجميع، أنا أؤكد لك، أنا في اليمن وأؤكد لك أن جميع الأطراف أكانت داخلية أو خارجية ليس لديها أي مصلحة من استمرار الحرب. كل الأطراف متضررة من الحرب، لكن للأسف الشديد الأمم المتحدة ما زال دورها ضعيف. نعم، أنا أشيد بدور الأمم المتحدة وعملها وجهودها، لكن ما زال دورها ضعيف جدا. دورها ينحصر ويتقزم من منظومة عالمية تملك المشروعية القانونية لإيقاف الحروب واتخاذ الإجراءات، ومجلس أمن يصدر قرارات ملزمة لجميع دول العالم، يتقزم إلى مستوى إدانات واستنكار وشجب، حتى أصبحنا نحن في الشعب اليمني يعني ثقتنا تنخفض في الأمم المتحدة وأنها منظومة إنسانية وأممية. نحن نعتبرها منظومة ضعيفة، منظومة ركيكة. نتمنى الآن غوتيريتش وغيرهم من الأمم المتحدة يبذلون الآن، أنا الآن أتكلم معكم وممثل الأمم المتحدة يبذل جهود كبيرة جدا لإعلان إيقاف إطلاق النار وإيقاف الحرب في اليمن، لكن للأسف الشديد إذا ما زالت الأمم المتحدة تنحصر دورها في الشجب والاستنكار والرصد للمجازر الذي يتعرض لها الأطفال والنساء في جميع محافظات الجمهورية اليمنية، إذا ما يعني تحولت إلى مرصد حقوقي بسيط، إلى هناك منظمة مجتمع مدني بسيطة جدا تقوم بدور أكبر من دور الأمم المتحدة. الأمم المتحدة ليست منظمة مجتمع مدني محلية في أي دولة، هذه منظمة أممية تأسست وفقا لميثاق مجلس أمن دولي يملك صلاحيات كبيرة جدا. لماذا لم يقم مجلس الأمن الدولي؟ أنا الآن أمامكم وللأستاذة كالامار ولكل ممثل الأمم المتحدة أتقدم ببلاغ عاجل إليهم، وأتمنى أن يصل إلى مجلس الأمن. لماذا لا يتوقف الحرب في اليمن؟ من المستفيد من هذه الحرب؟ من المستفيد من هذه الحرب المنفلتة؟ أنا أقول لك، أنا يوميا أنام ويعني أتوقع أنني سأستيقظ ومنزلي مدمر، ورغم ذلك ما زلنا مصرين وما زلنا صامدين لكي لا يتناسى الآخرين ولا يتناسى المجتمع الدولي أصوات الضحايا، الأطفال، أشلاء الأطفال، النساء، الإصابات، استهداف المدن بشكل خطير جدا ومنفلت. هذا يوجع قلوبنا ويؤلمنا، لكن لا ينال من عزيمتنا ولا يضعفنا ولا يهنا. نعتبره تحدي ونعتبره مسؤولية. نحن الآن نتقدم ببلاغ إلى الأمم المتحدة برفع يعني بلاغ رسمي إلى مجلس الأمن الدولي لنعلم لماذا لم تتوقف الحرب، وإذا لم يتم إيقاف الحرب بقرار من مجلس الأمن ملزم للجميع، فنطلب التحقيق في من وراء عرقلة إصدار قرار ملزم لإيقاف الحرب.
Rahman, Azabi, many thanks. And I think it's when we sometimes see the pictures from Yemen, the destruction there, I think many of us are wondering who profits from this war. This is a feeling I can only imagine is even stronger when you are living as Yemeni in your country. Back to Agnes Calamar, because we already heard so many accusations towards the United Nations, blaming them not to playing the best role in those conflicts, saying the least, and you have also been very critical. Maybe move on to different aspects and ask, is there any best practice country that you would point out and say, well, this government helps us in pushing things a little bit forward, or in giving the example how you handle human rights and the economy, for instance, at the same time. Some of us may think of, for instance, Canada or Sweden as examples of governments who put a very strong focus on human rights. But what is your impression? Is there a best practice example that you can mention? And if yes, what would it be?
Yeah, of course, there are always better practice. I'm not sure you can identify states and better practice for the entire human rights framework. So one state may be better at protecting women against domestic violence or sexual violence than another state. One state may be better at protecting freedom of expression than other states. So I think, you know, your question is good, but I will say, to give it justice, we really need to distinguish between you know, the type of rights you are talking about, a right to health, for instance. You know, you will be surprised, maybe some of the country that we are usually pointing out as very bad perpetrators, maybe they're doing quite well on right to health. So I think we do need to look for better practice, but we also need to be specific. I will personally not like to make big statement when it comes to Yemen. I cannot name a country that is doing particularly well. I can name the countries that are doing incredibly bad because they could keep selling weapons to parties to the conflict. And you know, in my view, that's what we need to focus on, and we need to denounce the UN as an intergovernmental organizations cannot solve what the members are doing if the members are not prepared to stop these kind of behavior. And you know, when the Security Council members are undermining their own resolution, you can start to wonder about the strength and the effectiveness of UN decision-making bodies. And maybe on the 75th anniversary of the UN, and to follow on what Abdul Rahman was urging us, I think this is a time to call for reforms. You know, the Security Council in its current membership, in its current way of proceeding, including abusing vetoes in for humanitarian causes. I mean, that is one issue that needs absolute, you know, a reform. So there are a few things that we can do in order to learn from the current stalemate.
Agnes Calamar and Abdul Azabi, many thanks for your contributions and for the discussion. It's been a big pleasure. And by this, we also reach the end of today's Raif Badawi Award ceremony, the Raif Badawi Award 2020. Many thanks to all of you who were watching us online. And we're hoping very much that next year we can come together at Frankfurt Book Fair in Germany in person and have a physical ceremony. But in the meantime, I think it's been very good. And I've been very, very grateful that we had this online ceremony just to keep up the message and to send out the strong voice to remember Raif Badawi's case, and at the same time honor a very outstanding journalist who's doing incredible work inside Yemen. Many thanks, and I hope to see you next year. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.